"He's dead," Clara Whitfield whispered, "and they think that'll stop me." For 3 blistering months, she'd worn mourning black as if a preacher had read vows over a love no pulpit would bless. No minister had ever sanctified her bond with Red Hawk, the Lakota warrior who'd stolen her breath under a canopy of desert stars. The telegram from Fort Mesquite hadn't wasted words. Lakota brave, known as Red Hawk, confirmed killed in cavalry engagement. Body recovered. Hostile neutralized. Those cold lines shattered her world like a bottle smashed against a rock. Night after night, she clutched the beaded bracelet he'd woven for her. The turquoise warmed by her restless fingers, the leather cords soft from sleepless palms. The hands in town said she'd taken leave of her senses, grieving out loud for a savage. Let them talk. Red Hawk was the only man who'd ever seen past her grit to the woman aching beneath. Now, 100 days later, Clara rode the scorched Arizona frontier with a different fire in her chest. The patrol that killed him bunked out at Hellgate Gorge, and she meant to find them. Not to plead for fairness. This land rarely dealt in that currency, but for the cold mercy of locking eyes with his killers before sending them to hell. What she never expected in that maze of copper rock and shadowed gullies was a miracle that would turn vengeance into something far more precious. Welcome to Wild West Lakota. Quick aside before we ride on. If you're into frontier love and grit, tap subscribe and drop where you're watching from and what time it is there. Back to the story. The dawn that ended Clara Whitfield's old life had begun like any ordinary morning. Coffee on the coals, her mare Sable pawing in the corral, and the ranch quiet enough to hear her own breath. But ordinary, out here, could flip faster than a coin. The day it broke had dawned with chores. As the only woman hand on the Lariat Creek Ranch, Clara was used to being first up, last down, and every bit as tough as any man who smirked at her place among them. She was checking troughs when Tommy Alvarez came barreling up the track, a folded sheet gripped tight in his dusty hand. "Miss Clara," he called, sliding off his lathered gelding, cheeks red from the run. "Telegram." Fort Mesquite sent it through town at sunup. Her heart stuttered at the sight of that official Army seal stamped in black. For weeks, she'd been waiting for word about Red Hawk, who'd vanished during a supposed peace parley with a colonel named Morgan. Their hidden love made danger a given without officers meddling in diplomacy. Red Hawk had insisted on trying to secure safe passage for his people through contested ground. With shaking fingers, Clara opened the paper and read the lines that would haunt her nights. Lakota brave Red Hawk confirmed killed in cavalry engagement near Redwash Creek. Body recovered and interred at Post Cemetery. Hostile threat eliminated. Colonelti Morgan commanding. The telegram slipped from her hands and drifted into the dust like a dying leaf. Tommy took one look at her face and backed his horse a step, sensing the storm building behind those green eyes. "Miss Clara, you all right?" She wasn't. She wouldn't be, not in any way that counted. The man who'd shown her love could bridge enemies, who had held her under turning constellations and promised they'd find a way between their worlds, gone. That night, she sat alone in her small cabin, holding the turquoise and leather bracelet he'd braided during their last snatched hour. He'd called the stones protectors, a reminder that some things here were worth fighting for. Now they felt like weights anchoring her to loss, so deep it stole breath, and a rage hotter than the noon sun. The first month after the telegram, Clara moved like a sleepwalker. She worked fences, pushed cattle, broke colts. Her body kept going. Her heart was buried in an unmarked grave at Fort Mesquite. The other hands gave her a wide berth. The empty look in her gaze and the way she kept close to her colt spooked even men who'd seen plenty. Foreman Harlan Keller tried kindness at first. "Clara, girl, take a spell," he said, hat in his hands. "Go see your sister back in Kansas City. Get off this hard country a while." She held his gaze, green eyes dull as river stones. "This is my place, Mr. Keller. I've got nowhere else." The second month, whispers stirred like snakes in Juniper Bluff. Folks had tolerated her oddities, her trousers, her seat on a horse, her refusal to wed a local boy with a hat tip and a ring. But grief over a Lakota man tested their patience. "Ain't right," Mrs. Pennington murmured at the general store counter. "Carrying on like that over one of them Indians." Girls lost her Christian sense. Clara heard every mutter, felt every stare. She'd run out of caring what small minds thought. Red Hawk's love had shown her that lines between races were drawn by fear, not truth. If that made her a pariah, she'd live with it. By the third month, grief hardened into something sharper. Purpose. Quietly, she started asking about Colonel Morgan and his patrol routes. She studied maps of the country around Red Wash Creek, memorizing every slot canyon and every watering hole. She cleaned her father's .45 until it gleamed and practiced her draw until it was muscle and breath. Late one night by lamplight, she wrote with steady hand, "Mr. Keller, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Thank you for taking me on when others wouldn't. Don't follow. I have business to finish, and I'll see it set right." Before dawn, she saddled Sable and turned her bridle toward Hellgate Gorge, carrying grief, guns, and a justice that looked a lot like fire. The sun beat down like a hammer as Clara urged Sable through a labyrinth of red rock spires leading toward Hellgate Gorge. For 2 long days, she followed a faint trail the army favored, stopping only to water her mare and catch a few hours of fitful sleep beneath a sky thick with stars. Each mile tugged at memories. Red Hawk had moved through this land like he belonged to it, and it to him, reading signs in the wind, in bird flight, in subtle shifts of shadow. He'd taught her the desert wasn't a beast to be tamed, but a living thing with rhythms and secrets, if you listened with your heart instead of your fear. She heard his voice in her mind and wondered, would the land speak of justice, or would it only reflect her anger back at her? On the third morning, she saw smoke lifting from a small cut in the hills, a cook fire. Her pulse jumped. She dismounted and crept forward, leading Sable by the reins through scrub until she could ease her body flat and look over the ledge. There they were, 8 cavalrymen in dusty blue, horses ground-tied and cropping grass by a thin stream. One of those men had to be the one who took the only love she'd ever known. She checked her weapons, the Colt at her hip, the Winchester in her saddle boot, the hideout pistol tucked in her boot. She'd rehearsed this moment in her head until it felt like breathing, but now a tremor ran through her hands. Then she pictured Red Hawk's face the last day she saw him, the way he'd cupped her cheek and promised he'd come back. The tremor steadied. She was edging into position when a racket rose deeper in the canyon. Shouts, horses scrambling fast. Something was off. She raised her field glasses, trying to make sense of the chaos. Through the lenses, Clara watched as the troopers swung into their saddles in a hurry, barked orders she couldn't catch from up here, and thundered eastward within minutes, abandoning a smoldering cook fire and trampled earth. Odd. But she wasn't arguing with luck. This was her chance to search for answers. Maybe a trinket stolen from Red Hawk. Maybe written orders that spelled out what really went down at Red Wash Creek. She led Sable along a game trail into the cut, boots sending little avalanches of iron-red dust sliding. The hush pressed around her. She'd spent months imagining this confrontation. Now the quiet almost hurt. Then a sound stopped her cold, a low moan from deeper in the cleft beyond the tense outlines. Clara drew her Colt and moved toward the sound, senses flaring that something didn't fit. She rounded a sun-baked boulder and froze so completely she forgot to breathe. Tied to a twisted cottonwood with heavy rope was Red Hawk. Her Red Hawk alive. His head hung forward, long black hair veiling his face, but she'd have known those shoulders anywhere, and the scar that hooked over his left arm. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Blood darkened his buckskins. For a heartbeat that stretched like a lifetime, Clara stood rooted, her mind refusing the truth her eyes delivered. The man she'd mourned, whose supposed death turned her world to ash, was bound to a tree not 50 yards from the soldier's fire. "Red Hawk," she said, voice scraping like dry bark. He lifted his head slow. Their eyes met. Disbelief sparked in his just as surely as in hers. His mouth moved, voice hoarse to breaking. "Clara." He coughed until fresh blood traced the corner of his lips. Her field glasses slid from numb fingers and cracked on the rock, the sound booming like a shot in the stillness. Everything she'd known for 3 months crumbled like dried clay. Her hand shook as she holstered the gun and rushed him, tearing at the knots, fingers clumsy on stiff rope. 3 months of sorrow and fury turned liquid, relief so intense it made her sick and grateful at once. "Hold still," she whispered, tears she'd refused to let fall stinging her eyes at last. "I'm getting you loose." When the rope finally gave, he slumped, and she caught him, his weight a solid miracle against her chest. Heat poured off his skin, fever rode him hard. Angry welts and infected cuts marked his wrists and ribs, signs of captivity and cruelty. "Clara," he breathed into her hair, the words breaking. "They told me you were dead. Colonel Morgan showed me a telegram from Juniper Bluff. Said you died when raiders hit the ranch. I thought." He had to stop to breathe, the sound tearing at her. The shape of the lie clicked into place with sickening clarity. "They lied to us both," she said, heat sharpening her voice. "I got a wire saying you died at Redwash Creek. They wanted each of us to think the other was in the ground." Red Hawk's eyes, dark and burning despite exhaustion, understood. "Morgan needed information about my people, where the winter camps would be. He knew I'd never talk. So he tried to break me by breaking my heart first, convince me you were gone. And they wanted me to stop searching," Clara said, the pieces settling into a pattern she hated. "If I believed you were dead and buried, I'd never go digging for truth." She held a canteen to his mouth. He swallowed, color easing back into his face in thin streaks. "How long?" she asked. "Weeks, maybe 3, he managed. "They moved me from one camp to the next. Always tied, always watched." His jaw clenched with remembered pain. "I told them nothing. Even thinking you were gone, I couldn't betray our people." She traced his cheekbone with gentle fingers, half to soothe him, half to convince herself he wasn't a mirage. "I came to kill Morgan and his men," she said, plain as iron. "Spent months plotting their routes, oiling my piece, practicing until my hand didn't have to think." Something like a smile ghosted across his battered mouth. "My fierce woman," he murmured, teasing threaded with pride. "Ready to go to war for my memory. I would have set Fort Mesquite on fire if that's what justice cost," she said, no softness in it. "And I would have done the same for you," he answered, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips, his breath warm and fevered against her skin. "But now we got something better than revenge, Clara. We have each other back." Hoofbeats rolled faintly down the canyon, distant at first, then gathering, bouncing off stone like thunder. Clara's head snapped up, hand finding the butt of her gun by habit. "They're coming back." Red Hawk nodded once, jaw tight. She swung his arm around her shoulders and heaved him upright. He moved with stubborn will, as if he'd walked through worse. "Can you ride?" she asked, already counting steps to Sable. "With you." He huffed a painful laugh. "I could ride to the far edge of this world." She boosted him on a sable, climbed up behind, and slid her arms around his waist to hold him steady. Sable felt their urgency and climbed the narrow trail with cat-like care. Shouts flared behind them as the patrol found the cut ropes and realized what they'd lost. Clara pushed Sable harder, trusting the knowledge Red Hawk had given her months ago. Hidden paths between hoodoos, narrow cuts that looked like dead ends if you didn't know better. "There's a cave 3 miles north," Red Hawk said, voice thin, head leaning against her shoulder. "Sometimes my people use it. Water. A hidden mouth. We can rest there." She angled Sable toward the place he described and didn't look back. They moved through badlands that would shake most riders, Sable sure-footed on shelves barely wider than her hoofs. Clara's pulse thudded with each echo of pursuit, but gradually the noise faded until it was only wind and their own breathing. The cave mouth was exactly how he'd said, narrow as a keyhole and half hidden by scrub, opening into a cool chamber with a spring bubbling up from rock. She got Red Hawk down and settled him on clean sand near the water, then set to work. She cleaned gashes and rope burns with steady hands, used what herbs and salves she'd packed out of habit, and wrapped what needed wrapping. "Clara," Red Hawk said as she rinsed a rag in the spring, "thinking you were dead, it near broke me. I can't. I won't be parted from you again." She looked at him, saw the same vow reflected in his eyes. "Then don't be," she said. "Come back to Juniper Bluff with me. We'll figure it out. We'll build a life, even if small minds can't stand it." She gave a small, crooked smile, thinking of the hands who'd judged her by skill, not skirts, and the few neighbors who'd left food on her step without a word when sorrow swallowed her. "And if they won't accept us," she added, "we'll make our own place where we don't have to hide." He reached up, cupped her face, and his rough thumb brushed a tear she hadn't known fell. "3 months ago, I thought love got ripped out of me for good," he murmured. "Now I know some ties are stronger than any message, any miles, any cruelty men can dream up." As sunset poured gold and crimson through the cave entrance, Clara and Red Hawk held on to each other. In that cool, hidden place, they understood that their love hadn't just survived loss and lies. It had been tempered by them. Out here, happiness was fragile as a bird's egg. That's what made it worth the fight. Clara and Red Hawk's impossible reunion is proof that love can outlast even the meanest deceptions meant to tear people apart. Sometimes the worst enemies aren't the ones who fire rifles or march in lines, but the ones who wage war with paper and whispers, those who try to convince us our deepest bonds are already buried. Colonel Morgan never understood that real love forges chains tougher than any telegram, any doctored report, any twisted mind game. Clara's months inside grief only carved her devotion deeper, while Red Hawk's captivity hammered his resolve to stand for both his people and the woman who held his heart. When they found each other again, that bond had been fired in a kiln hotter than anger and came out unbreakable. History backs it. Mixed couples on the frontier faced not only sideways glances and insults, but sometimes meddling from command posts that should have known better. Emotional warfare was a tactic. Break the spirit and the body follows. Clara and Red Hawk's fight against that cruelty is a quiet victory for human connection over institutions that try to stamp it out. Their cave didn't just save their lives, it began a new chapter, not as shattered souls clinging to what slipped through their fingers, but as two people who understood that each sunrise together was a gift. They would piece together a home where her ranch sense and his deep knowing of the land made something bigger than either could build alone. And as for the men who try to split them, the land has a way of turning back on those who try to bend it. What would you have done in Clara's boots? Let grief swallow you, or ride straight into the fire for the truth? Sometimes the hardest ride leads to the softest place. They didn't stay hidden forever. When Red Hawk's fever broke and his strength seeped back, they slipped from the cave at dawn and made their way across country, using ravines and arroyos that kept them out of sight. They skirted Hellgate Gorge in a wide arc, crossed dry washes like ghosts, and reached the backcountry north of Juniper Bluff by week's end. Safe beneath a stand of cottonwoods, they made choices not with big declarations, but with steady work. They split their days between caution and building. Red Hawk netted fish and set snares. Clara repaired tack and mended their camp. Nights they talked in low voices. They spoke of a place where no one would look twice at a Lakota man and a ranch woman sitting close by a fire, hands intertwined. They spoke of a valley Red Hawk knew, a hidden pocket of green where water ran all year and the soil held seed. It would be hard, but they were hard people. The first time they rode into Juniper Bluff together in daylight, heads turned so fast hats nearly toppled. Some faces tightened. A few softened. Foreman Keller met them outside the hardware store, eyes wet, words rough. He didn't ask questions that didn't need answers. He just clapped Red Hawk's shoulder, a careful, respectful touch, and told Clara there was always a place for her if she needed it. Mrs. Pennington, to her credit, found something interesting to fuss with behind her counter. You can't always change a town in a day. Sometimes you plant seeds and wait. Clara collected what supplies they couldn't do without seed, tools, a new kettle, and rode out with Red Hawk beside her. They didn't hide anymore, and they didn't linger where they weren't wanted. Inside, Clara felt a weight lifting. Rage had kept her moving. Hope would keep her building. The valley they chose lay beyond a line of low hills painted with juniper and sage, its entrance so narrow a rider could pass it by twice and never notice. On the far side, the land opened into a bowl of grass with a clear stream threading its way along a sandy bank. Cottonwoods cast deep shade. A flock of quail skittered in the underbrush. It felt like stepping into a held breath finally released. They staked a claim the old-fashioned way, by working it. They built a small house with their hands, cut posts from straight young trees, hauled stone until their backs screamed, and coaxed vegetables out of dusty soil. Red Hawk taught Clara to read the clouds and smell rain coming. She taught him how to shoe a tricky horse and fix a windmill with twine and ingenuity when spare parts were weeks away. Their home became a place where travelers found coffee and a safe night's rest. No questions asked. Words spread in quiet ripples. A few couples like them passed through, tired of eyes that followed and voices that bid. Clara and Red Hawk didn't preach. They just opened the door. The turquoise bracelet, once a talisman born alone in grief, hung near their doorway, where afternoon light turned it to a small slice of sky. On summer evenings, if you stood just so, you could hear Sable's hoofbeats echo as she and Clara moved down the canyon trails, a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. Time didn't heal everything, but it made space for joy to grow again. Some nights, when stars came out sharp and close enough to touch, Clara would feel the old fear flicker. What if something snatched this away? Red Hawk's hand would find hers in the dark. We live today, he'd say simply, we'll meet tomorrow when it comes. Years rolled forward the way they do out here, measured by calves in spring, storms in July, and the smell of wood smoke in the first cold snap. The ranch thrived. Calves grew fat. The garden gave more than they planted. They set aside a corner of the valley as a sanctuary for anyone needing a quiet place to breathe. Newlyweds with nowhere to go, a family stung by gossip, a man who'd been run off a job for speaking an unpopular truth. They didn't write rules on paper. The land wrote them in wind and water. Their children grew up half in English and half in Lakota, able to throw a loop and read a sky. They learned to respect what fed them and question what didn't. In time, one of their daughters married a blacksmith from a mining town. Another son took to teaching at a mission school, determined to turn classrooms from places of erasure to places of pride. The old army road fell out of use. The men who once hunted one man through canyons retired to back rooms and dim memories. No telegram could undo what Clara and Red Hawk built day after day. For all the beauty, there were hard years too. Drought, a winter that killed 3 calves, a fever that took a neighbor's child. But in each lean season, their bond held. It wasn't romance that carried them then. It was the stubborn, everyday choice to keep showing up with gentleness. Each time Clara brushed her fingers across the turquoise bracelet by the doorframe, she remembered what brought them here. Lies meant to break hearts, and a ride that turned those lies on their heads. Long after Clara and Red Hawk left this world, their story ran on like the stream that never dried in their valley. Their descendants still keep the place, stewards rather than owners, grateful rather than proud. The turquoise bracelet lives now in a simple cedar box, taken out on occasions when a young pair needs reminding of what they're made of. It has passed through 5 generations of hands, and each hand left a little of its warmth in the leather. On evenings when the light goes red and the wind carries a hint of rain, some in town say you can hear a mare's steady footfall over the ridges, the echo threading across time. Sable ferrying 2 hearts home on trails carved by will and wonder. Local historians, if asked, will tell you that stories like this weren't rare enough or common enough. They were simply the true ones that didn't make policy, only people. They'll remind you that on the American frontier, institutions tried to manage what they didn't understand, and ordinary folks either yielded to that pressure or risked building another way. Clara and Red Hawk chose the risk. Their love didn't just survive, it went to work on the world around it, carving out a space where dignity could breathe. Maybe that's all any of us can ask, for our fiercest bond to do more than comfort us, to widen the path for those who come after. If you've ever found something you thought was gone, love, trust, your own courage, then you already know how this story feels when the last line fades. Like a door left unlocked and a lamp burning in the window. If this tale rode straight into your heart, tap like and subscribe for more, and tell us what you'd love to hear next in the comments.